A mother's worst nightmare unfolds when her innocent family trip turns into a sinister game of survival. A missing child, a dark forest, and a horrifying truth lurking in the shadows. What really happened in that well? Stay with us as we unravel a chilling story you'll never forget. The rain had started just as the car pulled into the driveway. Thick droplets slid down the windshield, distorting the porch light's glow. Leah stared at the house, her heart pounding, her grip tight on the steering wheel. Her daughter, Mia, sat in the back seat, humming softly to herself. The tune was eerily familiar, but somehow unplaceable. The trip with Daniel had been unsettling. Leah had agreed reluctantly, her unease buried under his smooth reassurances. The cabin he took them to was deep in the woods, far from cell service. It smelled of pine, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. Daniel had insisted it was a surprise, his charm unwavering. Mia had clung to her favorite doll, her eyes wide as they explored the dimly lit space. At dinner, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel's laughter felt forced, his gaze lingering too long on Leah. His questions about her new life felt probing, invasive. Leah had smiled through it, her stomach churning. When Mia fell asleep, Daniel's demeanor darkened. He spoke in hushed tones, his words sharp and accusatory. Leah's unease turned to dread as the storm outside grew louder. Lightning illuminated the room, and for a moment, she saw his face change. His charming mask cracked, revealing something raw and unfamiliar. She barely slept that night, her ears attuned to every creak and rustle. Mia's breathing was steady beside her, a small comfort in the darkness. The next morning, the air was heavy, oppressive. Daniel seemed calmer but colder, his movements deliberate. He offered to take Mia for a walk while Leah packed. She hesitated, her instincts screaming to keep her daughter close. But his smile returned, and he promised it was just a short stroll. An hour passed. Then two. Panic clawed at Leah's chest as she called out their names. The woods swallowed her voice, the silence deafening. Daniel's car was gone when she returned to the cabin. The rain began as she stood there, the weight of it pressing down on her. Mia's doll lay on the porch, its button eye missing, staring blankly at the sky. Leah's breath caught as she reached for the doll. Its fabric was damp and cold, the stuffing poking through a torn seam. Her hands trembled, the weight of dread sinking into her chest. The storm intensified, wind howling through the trees like a mournful cry. She called their names again, her voice cracking.
Mia.
Daniel. No response. Only the relentless rhythm of rain on the cabin roof. She ran inside, grabbing her phone, praying for a signal. The screen remained empty, no bars, no connection. Her fingers hovered over the emergency number, but the call wouldn't go through. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dense woods outside. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, twisting like specters. She swore she saw movement, a figure slipping between the trees. Her heart pounded, the instinct to run battling the need to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards slick beneath her feet. The beam of light sliced through the rain, revealing only the gnarled roots of ancient trees. She ventured further, her voice hoarse from shouting. Mia, baby. Where are you? A faint sound reached her ears, a giggle, high-pitched and fleeting. It sent chills crawling up her spine. She turned sharply, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The giggle came again, but this time it was distorted, unnatural. Leah froze, her mind racing. It sounded like Mia, but wrong. She pushed forward, her sneakers squelching in the mud, her breath ragged. The forest seemed endless, the trees closing in like towering sentinels. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling well, its stones covered in moss. The giggle echoed from within, faint but unmistakable. Leah approached cautiously, peering into the dark abyss. Mia, she whispered, her voice trembling. Silence. Then, a faint rustling behind her. She spun around, her flashlight catching a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Daniel. His clothes were soaked, his eyes wild, a twisted smile on his face. You shouldn't have followed us, he said, his voice low and menacing. Leah stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she searched Daniel's face. Rain dripped from his hair, tracing erratic paths down his cheeks. But his eyes, they were unfamiliar, almost feral. What are you talking about? She stammered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Daniel took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. You should have trusted me, he said, his tone teetering between calm and unhinged. I told you it was just a walk. You had to ruin everything. Leah's grip tightened around the flashlight, her knuckles white. Where's Mia? She demanded, her voice breaking with desperation. Daniel tilted his head, his smile widening into something grotesque. She's safe, he whispered, his words chilling in their ambiguity. Safer than she's ever been. Leah's knees felt weak, her mind racing through every possibility. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave without Mia. The giggle came again, faint and echoing, as if carried on the wind. Leah's head snapped toward the well. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She turned back to Daniel, her breath hitching. What did you do? She demanded, her voice trembling with both fear and fury. Daniel took another step, the space between them shrinking. I gave her a choice, he said cryptically, his gaze locked on Leah. To stay with me or to stay with you? Leah's stomach churned, nausea rising like a tidal wave. What choice? She hissed, stepping back instinctively. Daniel's grin faded, replaced by something colder, darker. She made it herself, he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. Leah couldn't breathe. The world spun as she tried to make sense of his words. The giggle came again, louder this time, unmistakably Mia's. But there was something else beneath it. A faint, guttural sound, almost like laughter but not human. Leah's flashlight flickered, the beam faltering as shadows began to twist and shift around her. Daniel raised a hand, pointing toward the well. She's waiting, he said, his voice a chilling whisper. She wants you to join her. Leah's heart felt like it would shatter through her ribs. The flashlight flickered again, casting faint, erratic beams on Daniel's face. His smile widened, the rain dripping from his chin like dark ink in the weak light. Mia? Leah screamed, her voice cracking. She turned toward the well, her feet moving before she could think. The world around her blurred the rain, the trees, Daniel's figure retreating into shadow. The stone rim of the well was slick beneath her palms as she leaned over, peering into the abyss. The beam of her flashlight struggled to penetrate the blackness. Mia, she called again, her voice trembling. Baby, it's Mommy. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain hitting the stones. Then, from the depths, Mia's voice floated up, soft and distant. Mommy, come down. Leah froze, every muscle in her body tensing. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. The voice was hers, Mia's sweet, familiar tone, but something was wrong. Baby, are you hurt? Are you okay? Leah shouted, her words echoing back to her. A pause. Then, in a sing-song tone, Mia replied, It's so nice here. Come see. Leah's stomach dropped. She shook her head, gripping the edge of the well tightly. No, she whispered to herself. This isn't real. Behind her, a low chuckle broke the silence. Leah spun around, the flashlight jerking wildly. Daniel stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, hands tucked into his pockets. His grin had returned, wider than before, teeth gleaming in the faint light. What are you waiting for? He asked, his voice dripping with mockery. She's calling for you. Leah's hand tightened around the flashlight, her knuckles aching. You're sick, she hissed. You've done something to her. Daniel tilted his head, his eyes glinting with amusement. Maybe I did, he said. Or maybe this was always going to happen. Leah didn't wait for him to say more. She turned back to the well, the panic in her chest unbearable. Her flashlight flickered again, its beam catching something halfway down the shaft. A flash of pink of familiar pattern. Mia's raincoat. Leah's scream pierced the storm as the coat disappeared, yanked deeper into the darkness. Leah's scream faded into a choking sob as her knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the well to steady herself, her palms slipping on the wet stone. Her flashlight dropped, tumbling into the abyss. Its weak light spiraled downward, shrinking into a dim point before vanishing. Mia, she cried again, her voice raw, breaking apart in the downpour. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the rain seemed to pause, the forest holding its breath. Then came a sound. Soft, wet scraping, like something clawing its way upward. Leah froze, her entire body trembling. From the black depths of the well, a voice rose. Mom? It was Mia's voice, but warped, stretching and breaking in ways that no human voice should. Leah's breath hitched, her chest tight with terror. No, she whispered, backing away. This isn't real. This isn't real. Behind her, Daniel's laughter shattered the stillness. Low, guttural, and growing louder, it echoed through the clearing. You're hearing her, aren't you? He said, his voice laced with mockery. She wants you to come closer. Leah spun around, her fury surging past her fear. What did you do to her? She screamed, her voice cracking. Daniel stepped forward, his shadow elongating under the flickering flashes of lightning. She's where she belongs, he said simply, his tone almost gentle. And you'll be too? Leah's hands balled into fists as she fought the rising panic. Her gaze darted between Daniel and the well. Another sound emerged, a wet, slithering noise, growing louder. Leah turned just in time to see something begin to rise from the darkness. At first, it was only a faint outline. Small hands, pale and thin, grasped the stones of the well's edge. Then a head emerged, hair matted and dripping, obscuring the face beneath. Mia? Leah whispered, her voice trembling with equal parts hope and horror. The figure paused, its movements unnatural, jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. The head tilted slowly, revealing a face that was and wasn't Mia's. Her eyes were black voids, her lips twisted into a grotesque imitation of a smile. Come with me, Mommy, the figure rasped, its voice layered with something inhuman. Leah staggered back, her scream swallowed by the storm. Daniel's laughter erupted behind her, filling the night with its dreadful cadence. Leah's body felt paralyzed, her mind torn between the instinct to run and the overwhelming urge to save her daughter. The figure that looked like Mia crawled onto the edge of the well, its movements unnatural, limbs bending at impossible angles. Rain poured harder, blurring Leah's vision as the thing tilted its head again, black voids where her daughter's eyes should have been. Stay with me, Mommy, the voice rasped, dragging out the words in a sickening, echoing whisper. Leah stumbled backward, slipping in the mud, her hands scraping against the ground. Behind her, Daniel's laughter reached a crescendo, deep and guttural, reverberating through the trees like a terrible symphony. I told you, he said, stepping closer, his voice heavy with malice. She chose me. She chose this. Leah's mind raced, every fiber of her being rejecting his words. No, she choked out, her voice trembling but growing in defiance. You did this. You twisted her. Daniel shook his head, his grin never faltering. She was always mine, he said, as if stating an unshakable truth. And now you will be too. The figure on the well lunged forward suddenly, its hands outstretched, grasping for Leah. A scream tore from her throat as she scrambled backward, slipping again in the wet earth. Her hand hit something solid, a jagged rock, half buried in the mud. Without thinking, she grabbed it, her fingers slick with rain and blood from her earlier fall. As the creature leapt closer, Leah swung the rock with all her strength. It struck the thing square in the face, sending it sprawling back toward the well. A guttural shriek erupted from the figure, the sound inhuman and filled with fury. Daniel's laughter stopped abruptly, his expression shifting to one of rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, lunging toward her. But Leah was faster. Fueled by adrenaline and desperation, she grabbed a branch from the ground and swung it at him, catching him across the face. He stumbled, and she ran straight for the well. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached for the rope hanging beside it. "Mia, if you're there, hold on," she cried, throwing herself into the abyss. The darkness swallowed her whole. Leah's plunge into the well was swift, the cold, damp air rushing past her like icy fingers clawing at her skin. The faint light from above grew smaller until it was swallowed by the black void. Her hands gripped the rope tightly, the rough fibers cutting into her palms as she slowed her descent. "Mia," she cried, her voice echoing in the confined space. The silence was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of wet earth and something metallic, like rusted iron. Then she heard its soft, uneven breathing, coming from the darkness below. Leah's heart leapt as she descended further, her flashlight gone but her instincts guiding her. "Mia, baby, I'm here," she called, her voice trembling with equal parts hope and fear. A faint glow appeared below her, dim and unnatural, casting eerie shadows along the slick walls of the well. As she neared the bottom, Leah saw her daughter huddled against the wall, her small frame illuminated by the strange light. "Mia," she sobbed, releasing the rope and dropping to the damp ground. She pulled the girl into her arms, her heart breaking at how cold Mia's body felt. "Mama," Mia whispered, her voice weak, barely audible. Leah's tears mixed with the grime on her daughter's face as she held her close. "I've got you, baby," she said. "We're leaving. Right now." But as she stood, something shifted in the darkness. The glow around them flickered, revealing movement shapes that twisted and writhed, barely human. Leah's breath hitched as she realized the figures were closing in, their eyes empty voids, their mouths twisted into silent screams. "Mama," Mia whispered again, clutching Leah tightly. The figures paused, as if her voice had power over them. Leah felt a surge of strength, her love for her daughter overriding her fear. "Stay behind me, Mia," she said firmly, shielding the girl with her body. She reached for the rope, pulling herself and Mia upward with every ounce of strength she had. The figures swarmed below, their grasping hands missing her by inches. As they neared the top, the storm above seemed to intensify, lightning flashing like a beacon. Leah hauled Mia over the edge just as the rope began to fray, snapping under their weight. They collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping for air. The storm raged on, but the figures did not emerge. Leah held Mia tightly, the rain washing away the grime and tears from their faces. For the first time in hours, or perhaps a lifetime, there was silence. "Mommy," Mia said softly, looking up at her with tired eyes. Leah kissed her forehead, her own tears falling freely. "We're safe," she whispered, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. The well remained behind them, dark and still, as they walked away into the rain-soaked forest. But Leah didn't look back. She couldn't.